Hey, what's up, everybody? Sorry, in these rare instances where I'm host, I have to use my own introduction as a sound check for the live stream. Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Agasically Stavis from the Rounding Off Infinity Gaming channel on YouTube, the E2K2 Network podcasting channel on YouTube, aka Game Logic on Twitch, back with another episode of the Enough to Keep Going weekly games podcast with my co-host in crime, DBQ Hams. How are you doing, DBQ?
I'm doing much better now that I realized that it wasn't my connection that made you stop and glitch out. It was just your own mentality that allowed you to glitch out. So I'm glad to be back in the new year and glad to take a little break from everything to talk with you gentlemen. So thanks.
Yeah, no, no. My kids who have watched Wreck-It Ralph 1 and 2 do often refer to me as a glitch. And my other co-host in crime, Osiris Prime. How are you doing, Osiris?
Take two. I'm good. How you doing?
All right, we're going to try and muddle through this. I don't know exactly how it's going to go because the approach to this was a little bit different than it was in the last few years. But having completed our Gaming Superlative Award show at the end of calendar year 2020, we open calendar year 2021 as we would have preferred to have always done. However, it has not always been the case. But we're going to start off this year with our recount, I'd almost like to say recant, of the year 2020 and all of the stories in the gaming news. Not all of the stories, but all of the trends, all of the themes. Since the deep dive variant of the Enough to Keep Going podcast is centered around themes and not just individual stories. So the truth of the matter is that as we pulled this agenda together, the whole thing broke down really rather simply and much more so than I thought it would. Because despite, I mean, let's talk a little bit about just kind of in general what the year 2020 was in gaming and gaming news. The pandemic happened, and for a period of time, at least I almost thought that the video game industry would just kind of grind to a halt. And as we started to initially get the word of delays, it just became doubtful to me. I was like, well, we're clearly not going to release consoles this year. Clearly, some of the biggest games that we were told were coming this year aren't going to happen. And then as the year progressed, we started getting kind of surprise after surprise after surprise after surprise. And when the year ended, there was kind of this feeling that it was a really big year in gaming news. But as we pulled this agenda together and I looked at it, I was kind of like, yeah, but I don't know that a lot of it really had an impact. I don't know, DBQ. What were your general feelings of the gaming year in news 2020?
Oh, I I've thought about this a lot actually because so much of this year has been, I don't know, well, marred, scarred, impacted by delays. Like it is delays seem to be the biggest story of the year because even the exciting big story of a new console generation launch is still impacted by delays in terms of games that might have been in the launch window that are not in the launch window. Things that might have been system sellers that may not be for both consoles. And so having some of those, the delay aspect of that really, really hits on. But at the same time, I think there's meaning and value in acknowledging and this is it's going to sound cheesy because it's part of what every organization talks about when they go through a struggle, right? Is celebrating our successes, right? But at the same time, as a video game industry who saw a lot of sudden shifts in terms of their workplace dynamics based on the COVID pandemic, regardless of the country that you were in, that all of those factors, the fact that any of these games came out this year is also something to celebrate. So while things may be marred by delays, I think it is also a testament to the developers, um, in terms of getting those getting those experiences, getting that entertainment, getting those media out there.
Yeah, unquestionably so. I mean, we've all in our workplaces been exposed to the very slow evolution towards remote working and working from home. I've been, for the last 14 years, like one of my first jobs out in the civilian world, I kind of demanded or requested as part of my package that one of my things be that I get 1 day a week to work from home. And working through the culture at the time, who was still built around that notion that, well, if you're not at your desk, you can't possibly be working. And being in software and kind of being on the leading edge of this thing of no, if my job is software, there's like really no real need for me to physically be here in the office. Code can live anywhere. So, you know, on one hand, it's horrible that the pandemic happened, but great Scott, the world is so very fortunate for it having happened at a time where we were already kind of gearing up towards relatively robust capability for work from home capacity. Osiris Prime, any of your general feelings and thoughts on the gaming year 2020?
I mean, and you guys, I mean, pretty much said it, fairly well. I mean, for me personally, I don't, I thought this year was maybe it was because it was a transition year. We're going between generations. I didn't think there was anything, just game wise that came out that was totally spectacular. Maybe until the end of the year, a little bit. Maybe I could talk about that later, what I'm talking about. Uh, but yeah, I mean, I just the delays did hurt, and obviously with me being an Xbox person, and even wanting to get that new console, like I waited. I mean, I was always there, number one, day one, getting those consoles. But this time I was just like, what, there's nothing really I want to, I see out there. Uh, to me, I mean, I thought they're kind of lackluster. The just the launches themselves at the end of the year. Obviously, people are they're very popular. People are scooping them up, and that's another thing I'll talk about later. They're flying off the shelves, and even the Nintendo Switch was going gangbusters. Started to ramp back up. From the previous year, it started selling like hotcakes again. Because people were at home, people were they need something to do, they need something to do with their kids. Just all these situations that happen. But yeah, I think that's pretty much it.
Yeah, and I mean, you mentioned some of those surprises that came throughout the year. Like, I didn't expect Doom Eternal to have the impact it did. I didn't expect The Last of Us Part 2 and Ghost of Tsushima to have the impact they did. I didn't expect the buoyed sales of the Nintendo Switch to hit kind of like they did. And some of those are because of the pandemic dynamic. I really was labeling, to be quite honest, I had labeled this year before the pandemic started. I had labeled this year as a soft year and had kind of written it off. Like, in fact, I mean, when we go back and look at footage of the E2KG show, I'm absolutely certain there are episodes where said that this was going to be a backlog year, right? This was the year to get caught up. And I don't know that it necessarily turned out that way. One of the things I wanted to ask, both of you was, DBQ, what was your single biggest surprise story of the year 2020?
Oh, I wish you would have asked me this a day ago because I could have thought a little bit more about it. No, but really, I think honestly, the single biggest surprise story, probably from a game industry perspective, is that Halo got delayed. Um, for me personally, I think probably the single biggest surprise story. I mean, well, I should say, wait a minute, I'm forgetting news, right? I mean, from a game industry perspective, the single biggest story probably should be Bethesda and Microsoft, but I'll let somebody else talk about that. But I I'm gonna actually say, to keep the thread going of kind of a down year, a gap year, of a catch up year. I'm gonna say that my surprise story of the year is really the development of smaller indie studios during this year, right? That it is in a year when a lot of bigger studios are AAAs are either experiencing significant crunch and delays or are pushing out projects that there were a lot of really good smaller games that got released this year by smaller teams that were already working remotely, that were already set up to make this transition in a more expedited way. And so, because of that, I've I've discovered a lot more kind of smaller stuff than I might have not normally uh, in a year of a big tentpole releases.
Yeah, no doubt. And I didn't ask you 2 days ago because deliberately so that wouldn't have enabled the Agasicles pop quiz that we should always expect when we come into an episode like this.
So, how did I do? Did
You
I
did.
B
No,
minus?
no, you did great. Be prepared for a rope a dope though, because I gotta come back for you with a follow up question. Osiris Prime, singular, biggest surprise news story for you this year.
Uh, uh, as we like to do on E2KG, I'm going to cheat a little here, not say singular, but more as a theme here. And DB, you mentioned it was Bethesda or Microsoft buying ZeniMax, but not just that, but like all these companies were just like scooping up these kind of smallerish mid-level companies. You had EA with Codemasters. You had well, this is not mid-level, but Sony buying was it Insomniac, I believe.
Yep,
Um,
Insomniac.
yeah, you had Tencent, they're just scooping up companies and doing all kinds of things, in the industry. So, I mean, I think that was probably the biggest surprise, just because I've never seen so many companies like that. Maybe it's just because the world we live in now, where we get all this information like right away. I don't have to wait a month, like looking at a magazine or something, or hear it, at work or at school like I used to. So I think that theme as a whole, just all these companies getting like scooped up and bought. So, and hopefully for the better. Because sometimes that doesn't quite work out, especially Microsoft, because they've bought so many companies within the last year or two. It's just, hopefully, all that works out. And yeah, they've bought Mojang, and they kind of let them alone. But I don't think you can do that for all companies. You're gonna have to absorb, or merge companies together at some point, because you just can't sustain that, those companies separately like that. At least I don't think you can.
Yeah, and that's a theme that I've been predicting, but I was predicting that it would go down slightly differently, and maybe it is, maybe it's a hybrid. I had been expecting that the way that the consoles were being manufactured in the way in which the ballooning costs make it very difficult for third party big publishers like EA. They're all scrambling for all these new financial and economic models, right? Microtransaction season passes, and I just felt like this might be the year where that's kind of started to crumble as far as being tenable. Because even though they're making strides in that, if gaming consumers don't come along with it, then it's not going to be sustainable. And I've been predicting for a long time that what would happen is we would see an erosion of the big third party publishers like Ubisoft and EA and Activision, and see a lot of that consolidation happen around the manufacturers, that they would become kind of supercells where they all grabbed all those studios. So we're seeing some of that kind of in the Microsoft model, but we're also seeing that the third party publishers themselves are consolidating a lot of the industry around them as well. My single biggest surprise story for the year, being somebody who normally is pretty excited by the TikTok and the punch counter punch of the new console releases, which is not, I would contend, how this year went down. Like, both major manufacturers just drag their feet on releasing information, and it was almost the 11th hour right before release where we finally kind of had the whole picture of what was what. But for me, the 1-2 step in that sequence that I was super excited about, super surprised by exactly how it was executed, was the release, was the launch or the announcement of the Xbox Series S. And maybe I take that a little personally because that is the console that I own, but like that being dropped I mean, there was no question that Microsoft weaponized that, and the specific point in the timeline where they chose to let that information drop, and then there was the leak and all that. There's a lot of internet, buzz about, oh well, Microsoft can't. People are stupid, but I think, what it was. I think that they were already headed in that direction of roughly announcing it at that timeline. The leak was in the lead up to a show where it was going to be announced, and all that material had been put together. And that's another thing that made me kind of stand up out of my seat and go, it's on. It's console launch year. Let's go. So. Pretty exciting. My follow-up question before we start walking down the news stories chronologically is, DBQ, if you had to pick one console manufacturer who owned the news cycle this year between Sony, Nintendo, and Microsoft, who would it be? And as always, I pose the question that way, but if you feel the desire to cheat and change the conditions of the test and make your own Kobayashi Maru, Captain Kirk, you are so allowed.
Thank you so much. Right. I mean, I think it is in the phrasing of that question. Like, owning the news cycle is not necessarily dominating sales. Like, I would say that in some, I'm going to give owning the news cycle to Sony, because they split their console at launch from coming out with, there were plenty, as you have said, right? There were plenty of rumors already about the Series S, and I think the way that I agree with you. The way that Microsoft did that was smart and wise, business sense wise. I think the fact that Sony did the same thing was a little more unexpected. That the additional technology that came out through the DualSense controller, and I also think that the sheer amount of scalping that went on around the consoles also helps dominate the news cycle. So I'm going to give this one to Sony, even though the strongest manufacturer of the year, I would not necessarily give to Sony.
Yeah, and I could definitely see that rationale, particularly if you combine the console launch with the critical reception of a lot of the Sony titles, both things that they released in the end of the PlayStation 4 era, The Last of Us 2 and Ghost of Tsushima, and combined with like the Miles Morales release and even the Demon Souls remake for, I mean, the final quarter of the year, I would say, has been dominated news-wise when you talk about gaming titles almost explicitly by Sony, with Nintendo not really having any big releases, and Microsoft really arguably not having any big releases that are first party. It's pretty much just been a Sony story when you just talk about games. So, yep.
Well, I think that's a really good point, right? Like, talking about games, it's not necessarily about game quality, but it is. I mean, they are strong games. As somebody who enjoyed Miles Morales, and as somebody who's playing Sackboy's Adventure right now, there's a lot of strong games there. But the fact that Sony is the only console right now that had a whole lot or a significant number of console exclusives makes it relatively easy to dominate the conversation versus a third party game that is running well or well after patches on Series S or X.
Right. Yeah, and I did mean to combine with that also just kind of the way that Sony kind of walked away with everything at the VGAs. Osiris Prime, if you had to attribute ownership of the news cycle to one manufacturer, who would it be?
Well, I was thinking about it while DB was talking there, and first, and this is probably shocking to everybody, but I was going to say Nintendo. And you know what? I'm still going to say Nintendo, mostly
I would
because
agree. I think, yep.
mostly because I guess it was more of a kind of just like a general theme throughout the year, and of course I'm going to say that. They're always in the news. One, because obviously, they're Switch is selling gangbusters, like I mentioned before. But I think the second theme is what does Nintendo have out this year? I think that was the big question for everybody. They surprised us. Well, maybe they surprised some people. They surprised me with the Mario collection and just Mario 35th anniversary, just that whole thing that they've done, Mario 35 and all this other stuff they've been doing. Even the merchandise stuff they've done online now with the was it My Nintendo? They're actually starting to. Well, I shouldn't say sell, but you can get physical items once again through Nintendo's kind of club thing that they have, um, and that kind of built up more once the Mario stuff was announced. And just like I said, just in general, just because it was selling so well, and you got EA coming back to Nintendo. They released what the FIFA
Need for
series, I
Speed,
think.
yeah, FIFA,
Need for
Need for
Speed.
Speed.
I mean,
Yeah,
before like even before these latest announcements this past year, but now they announced all these other stuff that's coming
yeah.
down. Like you said, Need for Speed and all this. People are speculating Mass Effect maybe at some point. I don't know if they actually said that was coming to the Switch or not, but you had that, and plus just other third party support was pretty strong throughout the year. And then obviously indies is just like exploded on there. It's like iPhone quality when you look at the e-store or the e-shop. It's just like indies just everywhere. It pretty much dominates the whole store there, and even the sometimes even the like the download, like I think it's like the top 10 or whatever section they have in there. There's a lot of indie stuff. I know they kind of tweaked that too. I think near the end of the year, because those smaller studios started to say, "Hey, we're going to sell this game for like $1 or 50 cents or something," and that kind of jumped up, ahead of all the big boys. But I think they've kind of had a way to calm that down now. But yeah, that's why I think Nintendo kind of deserves that title this past year, I should say.
Yeah, and I think that's another strong set of rationale, right? You didn't even really throw Animal Crossing in there. But, I mean, absolutely, probably the single most biggest explosive title in terms of sales numbers that caught everyone off guard. The sales of the Nintendo Switch itself. One of the things that caught me was a UI upgrade, right? Which very small, but the fact of kind of putting Nintendo Online up at the forefront was I just kind of settled into this notion that the Nintendo Switch UI was going to remain the same for its entire life cycle. And now they're kind of pushing Nintendo Online and how some of the news things are oriented on that front page are also kind of a surprise. So definitely a strong contender. The Mario Assault has absolutely been, front and foremost. We mentioned it during the gaming superlatives, but and you guys will have to help me out with the title. But what is the Super Mario 35 Battle Royale thing or whatever?
Yeah, Super Mario 35 is
Yep.
their battle royale, and then you also had the All Star 3D All Stars. Yep.
Right, right, and as you all mentioned, right, all of us thought that the Super Mario 35 thing wasn't going to work. We were like, "What? Like, who would do that?" And it went off surprisingly well. The die I'm going to cast is the one that maybe people would predict that I would, and makes this a fully split cast. So unfortunately, Swiss can't be here to be the tiebreaker, but I'm going to stick with Microsoft. I think the announcement that they've made this year, I mean, this has been a very classic year, in my opinion, in terms of the Microsoft Rolling Thunder campaign, of how things start small and they start quiet and they just start building up to this thunder crash. And the Halo Infinite delay took a little bit of that away, but I would contend Phil got ahead of that fairly early. It wasn't super widely reported, but the people who paid attention heard him say Halo, the Xbox Series S and Series X does not need Halo to launch. And that was kind of in thinking with the way I think about hardware, which is it's a tech refresh. So the titles will come. That doesn't matter. Like, I'm going to spend the money on the hardware now, so I don't have to buy that and the new games. But between the Series S, how storage was being handled on the Series X and S, which I think at the end of the day is differentiated from Sony's approach. You can pick whether or not you think one is the better or the other, but one's available now and one's not. You know, uh, and all the service news is fairly incredible. The move with GameStop, the Great Scott EA Play becoming available. We don't often report on rumors. It's kind of a shtick here, but I'll just mention, the rumors that potentially Ubisoft Plus or Ubisoft Connect or whatever the heck it is now is gonna show up on on Game Pass as well is fairly huge news. Like, if you have Game Pass and you then have EA Play and Ubi Connect, like, the only thing you're missing is Call of Duty. Like, I don't know what else you need. So, it's been kind of blow after blow after blow after blow of, and then the Bethesda, acquisition has just been a pretty strong theme in Microsoft, at least doing what they want to do. Not to say that what they're doing is going to be, competitive or is going to be the winner for the console generation, but they have definitely been things that people weren't predicting, that they weren't expecting to happen. It is definitely not cut in the cloth of the old approach to the console competitive market. And so it has been, for me, the thing that's been most interesting to watch. So with that all being said, let's go ahead and start running down some of the chronology and comment on some of these individual stories. I'm going to try to go probably quickly, and we'll just see what it does. And you guys can feel free to jump in with me. I'm a little short on the details of some of these, again, because they just kind of wrap into the overall themes. I do specifically remember as the year began, on or about the end of January, we got the first kind of big shaking move that I felt was being signaled, which is YouTube signs the exclusive streaming deal for Activision esports, like Call of Duty and Overwatch. This was reported on The Verge on the 24th of January. And I'll quote, video game publisher Activision Blizzard has entered into a multi-year partnership with Google that will see the search giant's cloud platform power all of Activision Blizzard's game hosting and other technical needs. But more importantly, as part of the deal, YouTube will become the exclusive streaming partner for all of the game publishers' big esports titles, including the upcoming season of the Overwatch League and the Call of Duty League, which kicks off today in Minneapolis and Minnesota. And of course, this was a takeaway from Twitch, who had previously been the host for these esports leagues. Any comments on that story from either of you?
I just want to say I completely forgot about the story until I read it again just before the show. So and I'm not a big stream watching guy, so I mean, it kind of makes sense that it would kind of just like go over my head. But yeah, I mean, it's still it's a big deal for them.
I'd be curious to know what those numbers ended up like. Like, as somebody who has watched the Overwatch League in years past, that if this is and I remember having this conversation with a few of you early in the COVID-19 cycle of, do we see a spike in esports because it's athletic, or at least sport entertainment that can exist in a socially distant, non-crowd world, or does not having a crowd start to diminish from the aesthetic of these events as well, and then it really is just a streamer or a group of streamers with somebody commentating over the top of them. So I have not looked deep enough in to know what those viewership numbers look like compared to how they were on Twitch. But I think in terms of a business piece here, it is significant. Whether or not it's paid any dividends for YouTube and Google is more of the question.
Yeah, and I think the relevance here is the streaming scene, at least the newsworthiness of it, kind of took a backseat to as the year wore on with the console launches. But kind of spilling over from 2019, there was the continuing theme of this being a big deal and being big money. In 2019, we had the whole professional sports teams were starting their own esports teams and acquiring esports teams and starting leagues and that type of thing. And so this, to me, was the first the first drumbeat of a big publisher with one of the two biggest streaming platforms kind of choosing a side, and a shift that had to hurt Twitch to a certain extent. You're right, DBQ. We don't really necessarily have esports numbers, but we do know that obviously this year more millions and billions of hours of streaming content in general were consumed than ever have been before. And to me, this is part of that gravimetric effect. It's not necessarily that anybody hugely watches that. It's that even if people tune into that for 5 minutes just to see what's going on, from there they proceed on to consuming other channels or something on the same platform. So, um,
And just to say one more thing,
yeah.
just that DB had mentioned, I, you know, other than just the numbers, I wonder how this even played out. Just because obviously, you look at this picture here, and there's this big like stadium, or arena somewhere, but obviously that couldn't happen this year. I mean, how did that affect like the esports streaming? Now you said streaming, obviously went up, but that's probably more like individual streams. I'm assuming because not like these big esports things. So obviously we couldn't, obviously, and we heard, the esports leagues, canceling these big matches. But I don't know if I didn't really hear, or maybe I just didn't look into it too much. That did they just switch over to totally online, or like how did that like keep going about?
So some of them have, and we'll definitely be pulling more of those stories into the feed throughout the year. But yeah, at the end of 2020, there were a lot of acquisitions of esports teams, esports leagues. Some realignment of big publishers to leagues, and so the value of that in the marketplace was definitely still being felt. And yeah, a lot of them did go to did go to all virtual events and will continue with all virtual events, but they're still kind of big money, in the space. So yeah, just like you mentioned, definitely probably a little more subdued than they would have expected to be, but still not insignificant. Next story as we proceed on into, I think I had the story, I had it tagged as January. It actually, the report I have is released in February, but I think it happened at the tail end of January. Rod Ferguson leaves Gears and the Coalition to run Diablo for Blizzard, and we'll see this kind of as a recurring theme, is the shifting of personalities within the industry, either leaving the industry entirely or shifting over to other publishers. Rod Ferguson announced, and so this story from VentureBeat, I quote, Rod Ferguson announced today that he's leaving the Coalition, the Microsoft studio behind the Gears franchise, to lead the Diablo franchise for Blizzard Entertainment. Ferguson had worked on Gears since it was still an Epic Games franchise. He started at Epic in 2005 and then went over to Microsoft when it bought the Gears franchise in 2014 to lead the new studio in charge of the series, the Coalition. Its latest release, Gears 5, came out in 2019. You know, one of the things we'll mention here before I turn it over to you guys is obviously this is heavily tied into Blizzard, which, in my perspective, has misstepped a couple times in the last few years. It had the whole problem with the Hong Kong independence thing and its esports event, and then they came to their major con and got everybody hot and lathered up about Diablo, and then announced a mobile game. Diablo 3 itself, years and years ago, didn't launch with the best foot forward, and so people are scrutinizing what Diablo 4 is going to be like. So this to me is a very big move, with the Gears franchise having been on, I would argue, an upswing, at least in terms of the size of its rollout and its importance to the Microsoft portfolio and how much marketing goes around the Gears franchise. So it to me is a big deal for one of its key creative minds to be shifting from that over to Diablo 4. Osiris Prime, any specific thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I mean, this was a pretty big surprise. I mean, he was kind of the face of the coalition. Obviously, he was, the head of it. But, any interviews and stuff, he was always there, and doing everything. And it was just like, wow. I mean, I wasn't a big Gears guy or anything, but I still I could see, he was, an important figure in the studio. So it was pretty shocking actually. Wow, when I read this the first time. This one I did remember, by the way.
DPQ?
I will just piggyback on what you said in terms of that this becomes a trend as we go further and deeper into the year in terms of people either returning to studios or departing from studios. Um, so, and I think in the long term, it's a really good sign for the coalition, for Microsoft, and I think that that is even the Gears DLC that came out this late winter, with a little standalone couple missions, along with a multiplayer update. It shows that there's a commitment to that player base and to continuing to support those players in that franchise.
Yeah, fairly well received DLC as well. It's been getting a lot of praise, so good on the coalition for pulling that off in the wake of Ferguson's departure. Also, I've been playing a lot of Diablo 3 this week, and I'm getting excited about the notion of Diablo 4. So, good upswing for Blizzard as well, who, like I said, has misstepped with things like, hopefully we won't get another Warcraft 3 remake. I picked this story as part of the trend. February 2020 NPD spending dips after another slow month, which so it's pertinent to the month of February. The news story was released in March, but I thought this was interesting because in the month of February, again, to me, we were trending towards this being a soft year. It's console launches. People are going to spend time doing other stuff. And of course, this is kind of the precursor to what was going on in the industry to what the actual end result was, which was just resoundingly wild growth and greater spending in the video game industry than we've ever seen. But in February, and I quote from VentureBeat, consumer spending on video games and related products in the United States continues to decline, according to industry tracking firm the NPD Group. For the February 2020 NPD report released today, total industry spending on hardware, new full games, and accessories dropped significantly. It was a slow month for new releases, and gaming fans are less likely to spend big on new hardware with PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X coming this holiday. Talk about a premonition. Just chart-wise, biggest games that sold in the month of February last year, Call of Duty Modern Warfare, which continued to be a top seller, basically until it was superseded by Cold War. NBA 2K20, Grand Theft Auto 5, Dragon Ball Z Kakarot, which, we go back to our E2KG episodes then. This was a game which Swiss played, which again caught us all by surprise that it was actually good, and was actually fairly well received. The Division 2 continued to sell well, one of my favorite games. Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order was also in at number 10. Red Dead Redemption 2, which had released on PC the previous year as well, was in at number 13. Rainbow Six Siege, Need for Speed Heat, which I don't understand why that mediocre game sells so well, but it is what it is. And FIFA 20 was a big seller as well. So Osiris Prime, any notes on that story from February 2020?
I mean, I think it was just the calm before the storm there. I mean, it's I like these kind of shows where you can look back and say, see this, and then we find out what happens later on. It's just kind of interesting to me how things work out like that sometimes. So everybody, and even us included, we're thinking, this is just going to be a whatever year, but everything kind of exploded after that, like you said. So yeah, it was, like I said, the calm before the storm there.
DBQ, any comments?
I think it is just, the calm before the storm is a fair way. The story makes me laugh because, right, this is what we anticipated this year would be, as you said. And then we just saw the unprecedented increase in terms of game sales based on lockdown and quarantines and safer at home orders from state to state across the United States. So
a lot of these games shooting back up to the top of the charts, like Ring Fit Adventure, which you wouldn't think, but obviously since everybody's home,
Well, right. I mean, we could talk about that as we talk about 2020, right? I mean, so Ring Fit Adventure was in there. Ring Fit went away as the pandemic settled in. Ring Fit went out of supply because people bought it in droves, and it was like late summer, like August, that it was finally back and available, and then continued to sell like hotcakes. So, once again, an amazing story and contention for that vote from Osiris Prime that Nintendo really owned the news cycle this year. Speaking of Nintendo, here on Polygon, a story by Michael McWhorter. Nintendo Direct for March goes live. Watch it here. Settle in for some news, Switch game news. So this, to me, and I could be wrong, but was kind of the first major direct in what wound up being a year full of virtual announcements, which again was another thing we didn't anticipate. I think we weren't getting an E3 this year anyway, but we had expected that there would be, a bunch of in-person press releases and keynotes. But this virtual event wound up kind of being the standard for the year. And I quote, Nintendo has a surprise new episode of its Nintendo Direct series, and you can watch it right now. New episode of Nintendo Direct runs around 30 minutes and focuses on games coming to Nintendo Switch. In that direct, they touched on Xenoblade Chronicles, Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. Again, Nintendo has released kind of a slow trickle of new characters coming to Super Smash Bros. Ultimate throughout the year. They showcased Animal Crossing New Horizons, which again just went on to arguably become not selected as Game of the Year, but man, it's just a force in terms of sales on the market. And Pokemon Sword and Shield. Any comments about this story and when it dropped? Any remembrances of feelings, emotion, compassion for the Nintendo platform and how it was kind of settling into the consciousness as we started to enter the pandemic?
So I'll say that this is probably the last time that things sounded exciting in terms of the pipeline for Nintendo. Um, well, and I see Osiris's head shake here. Not so much that it sounded exciting, but that I think of the three hardware publishers, that Nintendo was hit more significantly with the pandemic remote work aspects. I think there were more delays out of Nintendo's catalog that really thinned out the back half of their year, regardless of what might have been planned. But this was at a time when they were still churning along and thinking that they had their fiscal year mapped out, and that shifted suddenly. And I think that's the part of this that stands out to me is the year that could have been if things had remained healthy.
Prime, any counterpoints?
Actually, I I actually thought well, personally, I thought the opposite of this direct. I thought was one of their weaker ones. But they did have a lot. Once again, they did have a lot of third party announcements on this one, like BioShock and I was just looking at it and I forgot now some of the other games. The Panzer Dragoon remake and Star Wars Pod Racer, and some of these other games. A lot of like last like 5 minutes or so was like all Pokemon, which was fine, I guess. But that was just about the DLC and stuff. But just like I said, personally, I thought it was kind of one of the weaker ones. Some of the other ones were a little bit more exciting for me, at least. But I think overall, I think it was just kind of a good indication of what the year was going to be, since there wasn't, obviously, like you said, there wasn't going to be an E3, or at least not an E3 like we've known even at this point, up to this point. So.
Yeah, and a comment on that too. We're not paid journalists, but we live the journalist lifestyle in this back half of our day, of our lives, at night. And I will say we had a lot of discussions about what the pandemic and not just the pandemic, but even before the pandemic, what just the loss of E3 was going to do to the news cycle. And we were planning to like go to war in June and July to try and keep up with the news cycle. And then the pandemic hit, and I will say, at least from my perspective, it made it worse. Like, and again, the feet dragging from Microsoft and Sony about releasing information. I felt like in order to keep up with everything that was going on, I felt like everything was constant. It was all atomized. It was coming from 99 different directions. And I felt like it was more difficult to keep up with the scramble of news right up until maybe like a month before launch. And then about a month before launch, things started trickling down and we got to the initiative has hired like somebody, and I'm like, why are we reporting on who the initiative has hired when they haven't even told us what game they're working? Like, I don't care until they announce what they're working on. So I don't know. It was just kind of a weird staffing problem from my perspective in terms of how we were going to operate throughout the year. I don't know. Any comments on that aspect as we started heading into the spring and the summer and what would have normally been E3?
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely hated the news cycle this year past March, April, because of the pandemic happening. And, we didn't have these big events like E3 and Gamescom and Tokyo Game Show. Stuff was coming out almost like every other week during the summer, and it was just like hard to keep track of and hard to you had to jump on it. Well, just because of us, how we are, and plus we do the podcast, we want to report on it. It's just like, man, trying to work and try to do all this other stuff, and it's just like it was better when we had that, just like that week, maybe even like 2 or 3 weeks, because sometimes the week before E3 and some of these big shows, there's stuff, but it just seemed a lot harder to kind of keep track of everything. And at one point I was just like, all right, these are too many like directs that are coming out. I just like kind of just like lost trying to actually like write down stuff and trying to keep notes and all that. I was just like, I couldn't do it anymore. DB.
I think the other piece of that for me is you're right. It was hard to keep up on, but it also meant that the continual drip was less enthralling. It was less exciting. That it was, the expectations. Thinking about, the early spring announcements with Xbox, that we were hoping this was going to be the big one, and then they came out and said, no, this really isn't the big one. Don't get your hopes up, and
Here's the
we'll be
controller.
back again, right? It just like, because there was never a focal point, everybody was hopeful that each new announcement was the big one. And we didn't have a bullseye to target, and so we were excited anytime we hit the dartboard, or hopeful at least. And because of that, I think you're right, Prime. It did get exhausting, and it also became, unfortunately, I think in some ways, it became a little easier to get lost in the cycle as well. Like, there are things that will end up coming out this year that were announced last year that will be a surprise to people. That even for us who follow this, there are things like, I went back just this past week and looked through and saw stuff in an announcement from April, May, and thought, oh yeah, I remember that game. That looked really cool. Whatever happened to it? I haven't seen anything from it, right? And so not only is it a delay, but it's also things that got buried because of the way that the news cycle was constructed.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think. Sorry, guys, just real quick. I think I actually paid attention more to the indie ones, just because it was maybe just because I was kind of in that mindset too, that past last year, where I kind of wanted to get into more of these indie games. But when some of these indie studios kind of like came together and did a couple, there was like 2 or 3 of them at least, like kind of bigger ones. That I actually like kind of was like, oh, yeah, that's kind of cool. I kind of like what I'm seeing here, instead of I mean, yeah, you got Activision and Ubisoft. Yeah, there's an Assassin's Creed probably coming out, and Call of Duty, and you know what's coming from Sony more than likely, and Microsoft. So it was kind of nicer to go to these little smaller directs and kind of see what they had, coming down the line.
yeah, there were definitely, one, my last two notes on this topic, for Swissguard, bless his heart that he invigorated such interest in Ghost of Tsushima as a component of the news cycle as early as, when was the first time we saw that? Like 2018? Like, I want to say we saw it at E3 like 2 years in a row before
Yeah,
it released.
it was the big 10-year E3, right? I mean, it
Yeah,
was yeah,
yeah,
which I think
yeah.
was
So,
18.
yep. So and I rode right along with him. Maybe not with as much vigor, but that culminated in a great payoff. Like, so many times you start paying attention to a game and then it comes out and it just doesn't equate to all of your hopes and dreams. And so typically I don't follow a game from incubation, through all its trials and travails to release. But Ghost of Tsushima was one of the big payouts for this year, if you tracked it through the news cycle. But I also think there was a lot of individual title fatigue. Like, quite honestly, by the time Assassin's Creed Valhalla released, I was just like, can we please stop talking about this? Like, can we please? I mean, Great Scott, earlier in the year, it was no offense to you, Brian, but like, could you please enable ray tracing on Minecraft so we could stop talking about it like every 3 days, right? It's just, there was so few really meaty pieces in between, like what felt like a highly scatological set of drum beats, that just with certain titles, it just as you mentioned, DBQ was repeated so many times that I was just like, come on, let's move on. While we're talking about that, let's go ahead and go into the start of what was this duplicitous thing of half excitement, half fatigue. As DBQ mentioned, every time they stepped up to the plate, we thought this was the big one. In April, we got the Inside Xbox April 2020 episode news recap. This directly from newsxbox.com. And I quote, "Today on our first Inside Xbox episode of 2020, we got a closer look at the single-player campaign in Grounded, the upcoming survival adventure game from our friends at Obsidian Entertainment, revealed the latest Xbox Game Pass titles, and discussed the recently revealed Xbox Series X tech, giving viewers the skinny on the most important things to know about the upcoming Gears Tactics." Several other titles were mentioned in this, but to me the big thing was, this is one of the first really big instances in 2020 of where we got an in-depth look at some of the tech powering the Xbox Series X. We also talked about the controller, ray tracing, variable rate shading, which I still contend is one of the biggest news stories from the tech stack in terms of the Xbox Series X, and several other things. Gentlemen, any comments on this kind of beginning of the Rolling Thunder campaign for the Series X and S release, as well as other titles and services in the Microsoft portfolio?
Forza Street Races, anybody? Anybody remember Forza on mobile? You could unlock some achievements, people. Yeah, yeah, you're right. I mean, like this was a little more hardware focused, and the software that was talked about were things that we already knew about or that were not focused on the new console.
Yeah, absolutely. Prime, anything to add?
No, I got nothing for this one.
Yeah, one thing that we also haven't mentioned is this was also the year that, we'll probably mention it later on in the show, but also this is, we got the first new mention or additional mention on the expansion of Project xCloud and where it was, and how it was going. This was a year that was kind of tumultuous for some of the cloud gaming titles, but specifically for xCloud in terms of how it compares to GeForce Now and some other cloud streaming services on what titles would be available. We saw publishers kind of cozy up to the notion of cloud streaming, and then kind of as we got into about this time frame, we saw this pretty rapid and massive back off from participation in cloud streaming from a lot of publishers that kind of threw me at least for a swerve from where I thought things were heading. But more on that as we continue the walk down. This story, as we head into May, from TechRaptor.net, the Super Mario 64 PC port has been taken down by Nintendo. And I quote, "Last weekend, an enterprising modder released a port of Super Mario 64 to the PC. This port included ultra-widescreen support up to an exciting 4K resolution. While gamers around the world celebrated such a momentous achievement, it was only a matter of time before Nintendo responded." Osiris Prime is our resident Nintendo expert. Any comments on this drumbeat in the news cycle of 2020?
This was this is probably one of the first news story, or not first news story. This was the beginning of seeing Nintendo taking down games like this. And I just saw a news story, I think sometime this week, that they're taking, what was it, Mario Kart or Mario Smash Brothers or something, like some mod or something like that. But yeah, I mean,
There was a bunch of mods for Smash.
yeah. So it just kind of, the beginning of, and I shouldn't even really say the beginning because they kind of always did this, but I think this year it was kind of more prevalent where or at least got, news coverage where, they were taking projects like this down. So, I mean, business wise, yeah, I mean, obviously you want to kind of protect your IP. But, kind of stinks for, the people doing this, obviously, they were excited for, they like Mario and they want to, bring it into a newer age, but, it gets taken down, unfortunately. So.
It was a really pretty port. I mean, I remember looking at it with my kids, and it it had some really. I mean, it was a well done. It also was not a surprise at all that it came down, but it was a well constructed piece of software. I'll say it for that.
Well, and Primes hits the square on the head as well, with his comment that this was kind of the beginning of a very strong theme that we saw throughout the year. The thing that was very interesting to me, too, as I look back, is this is kind of the really first big muscle movement that that we feel like is attributable totally to Bowser in his regime. So, much in the, for a very long time, Tim Cook ran Apple after the takeover from Steve Jobs, and a lot of it was just the continuation of the status quo, right? There was nothing new, there was nothing unexpected. It was just kind of what we would have expected to have seen had Jobs still been in charge. And then there's sort of becoming particular events where, this is Tim Cook's stamp on Apple and what he's doing, and this is, not in a good way, unfortunately, the thing that I now start associating with the post Reggie era with Nintendo is this rabid pursuit of takedown and kind of a swerve back. If we go back, we mentioned a few weeks ago, if we go back to the beginning of kind of the outgrowth of streaming, that Nintendo was the last publisher to kind of have its heels dug in and say, oh, no, you're not streaming our content. And was kind of aggressive with several streamers about, not being allowed to stream games, and then eventually kind of backed off that and went along with the rest of the industry. But it seems like that particular menu item is back on the table. Microsoft had its turn up to bat, and Sony went second, which is, as years go, this is always the interesting two-step, is, who's going to reveal what first, who's going to play their cards close to the vest, as I mentioned with the Series S, who's going to weaponize what piece, for success or failure. So as we started getting into June, this article from CNET, Sony's daring PS5 design, new Spider-Man game, and everything else we learned by Ian Scher. Sony's PlayStation division showed off the new look for its upcoming PlayStation 5, as well as new games including Gran Turismo 7 and Hitman 3. I don't even remember those games being showcased, but I always think Gran Turismo is a pipe dream anyway, so I never take it as any credible
GT looks pretty, and they actually said in the premiere that it was going to come out this year, in 2021, which also seems like a pipe dream. So
we'll see. Today, Sony finally revealed the PlayStation 5 in full. It showcased a fresh white design alongside a new suite of games. So this was our first look at the physical hardware for the PlayStation. This is now, mid-June-ish of this year. Today, Sony finally revealed the PlayStation 5 in full. It showcased a fresh white design alongside a new suite of games that includes the return of familiar characters interspersed with entirely new titles, some of which looked dazzling. The games were shown alongside the new look for the device, which is tall and thin and colored white on its front and back with blue light and black accent colors on its sides. The company said it will reveal a price and launch date for the PS5 later. The company also said there will be a discless all-digital version, which had been reported about since 2012. So actually, at this point, they had only revealed the disc version of the PlayStation 5 at this call. So, any remembrances of feelings of fervor and excitement coming off of this announcement, gentlemen?
are you sure that it was only the disc version? Because in the Sony Direct online presentation, they hit both. They showed both, but you got the slow, sexy rollout of the disc version, and then when they showed the family of the camera and the controller and the disc version, and then they also showed a discless version there.
Yeah, I absolutely could be wrong. I am only going off of this article. My own memory of these events are definitely fuzzy. So, because I'm living in the here and now of the new console.
At that point, we didn't have pricing. We only had that there were two different SKUs coming.
Yep. Correct, absolutely.
Yep.
And at this point, we did not know about a Series S. So, in on our own shows, we were talking about predictions of pricing, and we were talking about the expectation that it was going to the PlayStation 5 was going to bracket high-low around the Xbox potentially, or whether or not the Series X would come out at the same price as the PlayStation 5. So Prime, any comments as this reveal went down?
I mean, I didn't have any. I haven't really followed PlayStation for a while at that point. I mean, like religiously or anything. So I mean, it was kind of cool that they finally um, released at least the hardware, what the hardware looked like. So not very pretty in my eyes, but that's just me. But I was interested in Miles Morales though, even though, like I said, I haven't bought a system in a while, but and just like Spider-Man in general. So I thought that was kind of cool. So
Yeah, you're not wrong about the thing not being pretty, as I just lugged it once again over from the big screen TV over to one of my streaming workstations for production next week, which is always a problem in my life. But during the show, we also got, I think, the first show of Godfall that I think that we saw, which is that a Gearbox game?
I believe so, right?
It's published by Gearbox. It's developed by a smaller studio.
Right.
But we got first gameplay of it. Yes, we got a big
Yeah.
long gameplay trailer. Yep.
Yep, we also got more footage of Ghostwire Tokyo, which was a big anticipated title from it showing at E3, although they have since changed. I think her position was the creative director, who endeared us a lot to the potential of this title. We also got final confirmation that Grand Theft Auto 5 was going to be re-geared for next generation consoles at this event. I'm trying to see if there was anything else major.
Demon Souls remake. I don't know if you mentioned that.
No, and I probably wouldn't, but yes, for some people,
Well, I mean,
that's a
major for-
significant thing.
Major for Sony or for PlayStation people.
Right. Yes. We also got, I will admit, again, not a title that I would pay super attention to this year. I pay attention to it maybe every 2 or 3 years, but we also saw first footage of NBA 2K21, which, say what you will, the visuals are always super impressive, and it definitely always takes advantage of whatever hardware platform it's deployed on, and I was fairly taken aback with, again, its visual quality and implementation. Taken aback in a good way. Impressed
First
by.
footage, we saw really sweaty Zion Williamson, right? I mean, it wasn't in-game footage. We saw probably engine footage. Yes. Okay, I'll give you that much.
Which I feel like is pretty much all that we ever see in a sports game trailer. So, yeah. As we go on into July, this was, so I mentioned Microsoft owning the news cycle. This is one that blew me away when it went down, which was Microsoft shutting down Mixer. And now this story actually released, we're still in June in terms of the rundown. This story was released in July, because when the whole thing kind of blew up, I don't think it was really understood what its impact was until the aftermath, which is why I picked this article to talk about it. This article posted on Windows Central. As Microsoft shuts down Mixer, the streamers left behind speak up. When Microsoft outlined plans to shutter its Mixer streaming platform, prominent streamers were left scrambling to stay afloat. These are their stories. Microsoft recently announced a withdrawal from the live streaming space with the closure of Mixer, its ambitious response to Twitch's soaring success. The industry looks more lucrative than ever and is host to some of the hottest emerging digital talent, with online viewership on the rise. But Mixer winds down operations on July 22nd, 2020, presenting its members only a brief window to jump ship before disappearing from the web. This still flummoxes me on. I in some ways I get it in terms of let's consolidate our effort and focus on the things that are really important to us. But after all the muscle movements of getting Ninja and other streamers into exclusives on the Mixer platform, after the big rollout of new monetization features for streamers that was meant to bring it in parity with Twitch and its bits, and Twitch's rollout of advertisements, this just seemed like a ton of effort leveraged to then just turn around and let it all drop. And again, cutting all of those online personalities afloat and just leaving them to scramble and figure out where to go thereafter. In the midst of a console launch year, which I would have felt like having a streaming platform would have been a thing to leverage. So it was just really weird to me. I don't know. DBQ, your thoughts?
Yeah, it did seem really sudden given the amount that they invested, as you said. I think I, I want to see the spreadsheet, right? Like I would think you're right. Like they could have leveraged the launch and built in some, maybe not even built in, but just hyped it with marketing in terms of combining these two things together. But in hindsight, it's probably the right move, right? Because the launch cycle was not, they were supply constrained, and so they couldn't get as many units out there as they wanted. So even if they were going to hype this streaming combination of Mixer and Microsoft, it wasn't going to go over as well because there was not as many consoles in the pipeline. So, but it does feel like what their loss, you know, evaluation was in this must have been just razor thin because to sink as much money as they did in and then to turn around in a year later and say no, we're not seeing the return on that investment, what their ROI was. um, that's the surprising part of this, is that usually you see these things kind of drag on and eventually die a slow death rather than kind of be shut off prematurely to prevent any future losses.
No, yeah, exactly. Prime, anything to add?
Uh, it just once again, this kind of personally hit me because I was pretty much streaming exclusively on Mixer at that point, and it was just like a blow to me. But even some of the things talking later on the article and kind of filtering into some of the news stories that we'll be going over here about just the internal strife with racist and sexual harassment stuff that was going on internally within the company, which I didn't even know about until obviously afterwards. So, uh, and possibly that playing a role in all of this too, and the fact that they moved over to Facebook gaming was like, oh man, come on. But that was like, once again, that's a more personal note on that point. But yeah, that was it.
Okay, and then our final article for the first half of 2020, because this will pretty much bring us to the midpoint, what the video game industry is and isn't saying about Black Lives Matter. So, obviously, a lot of negative things happened socially around the world. This year, the pandemic was one of them. Then, just to further dig the human race into a hole was the whole explosion of race riots and protests in the middle of the year, decrying allegations of police brutality. So this article on comicsbeat.com, let's see, who should I attribute this to, by Josh Hilgenberg. Last week, as widespread protests across the United States continue to grow in intensity and videos of police violence against protesters spread across social media, many corporations and industries publicly announced their support for the black community in America. Among those were members of the video game industry whose statements in support of the Black Lives Matter movement and subsequent blackouts and rescheduling of events were met with mixed reactions from the gaming community. The reactions unfortunately reflect the underlying bigotry that many gamers bring into their play, and that the industry itself has done little to curtail. Prime, any comments on this news story and trend and theme throughout the year 2020?
Um, oh, sorry, I was just kind of going through the article real quick here again. Um, yeah, I mean, it was it was just a tough year, and I know we had, I think we had our show. What was it, that day of, or the night afterwards, or something? When all this was going on, and uh, just the struggle to figure out, um, how to handle this, without, I don't even know how I want to say this, just without, coming off like, like this didn't, matter or anything like that. But and I think everybody was struggling, kind of to figure out how to go about this, which shouldn't really be a struggle, I think, because I mean, we're talking about pretty big events that were happening. So I mean, um, yeah, that's all I have to say for now.
Yeah, no, it's a difficult topic, and I don't. I don't envy you me making you go first. So DBQ.
No, it's all right.
I'll jump in
You
here
gotta give DB a
yeah,
break every once in a while.
right. I mean, I think you're right though, right? It's reasonable that we struggle with how to frame this. That this was a challenging. We had a challenging few weeks of discussion here about that, um, but and I don't even. It has not just been a challenging few weeks, right? It has been a challenging year. It's been a challenging half of a decade. It's been a challenging century. Like this came to a head, but this is also not a new issue, and this is not an issue that was resolved within a week of media coverage as well. And so there are larger cultural economic issues at play here, um, but the fact that it came to the point where there was enough pressure that corporations got involved to make statements, that it was not something that could be sat on the sidelines about for the sake of keeping your head in the sand and hoping that both sides will continue to purchase your goods. That corporations came out on a variety of fronts based on moral, ethical standards and human dignity, and made some statements. I think that is and took some actions, right? Like there were prominence around African American developers and studios and games, but at the same time, in the true corporate aspect of this is that while we as a while there might have been hope for the ability for the culture to use this as a launching point, it is also relatively easy to slide back into the norms as well. And so, while statements were made during this time, whether or not I think you would hear people talk about this, you'd hear commentators talk about this throughout the year, that what has been done since this point, that just because there was a news cycle to gain some headlines over, what actual efforts and progression has been made as well.
Yeah, and it's all commented on it on a slightly skewed vector, since you guys have covered everything else so well. What I was most excited about as an outgrowth of this is, I mean, my personal feeling is that, you know, I would hope that I would contend that the story of 2020 and the thing that has been the most problematic about 2020 is people's inability to discuss differing views without it devolving into a flame war and getting out pitchforks, and even more violent weapons, and declaring that somebody's going to go to nuclear war over a difference of opinion. That is the thing that I find most problematic, and part of it is not being able to talk. But another part of it is not just being able to say that you disagree with somebody without calling them a name, right? These are simple elementary school level playground rules. These are things that I talk to my kids about and they have a capability to understand. Why grown adults can't get their heads wrapped around it, I don't understand. Look, if you don't like somebody because of the color of their skin, then it's a thing for you to, you're entitled to that opinion, right? Your inability to express that without slandering somebody concurrently at the same time is what makes the whole thing a problem. And vice versa, right? Your insistence that people who don't like people because of the color of their skin are evil, and are the death of mankind, you're entitled to have that opinion. Your inability to render that opinion without spitting on somebody's dead grandmother, that creates a problem. So one of the things that I actually like about the outgrowth of this is the software angle, which is for the longest time since, when did Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 come out? The game that I ascribed, the downfall and the toxicity of the gaming community to. Like, for a very long time, being somebody who works in cloud engineering and AI and ML, I have felt like the native language processing tools and other things and automation are there to stop the toxicity in the gaming community. And this is the first year finally that we're seeing some of that roll out. And some of that is just commitments and talk. But Activision on Call of Duty has talked about, look, we're going to start utilizing some of these advanced technologies to start capturing what people say, analyzing what people say, and putting automation around when you're reported and you use a word that you shouldn't use to express your discontent about something, you're gone. Like, we're not going to talk about it. We're not going to have a discussion. You're just gone. Sure, you can go off and create another account, and if we can't trap your IP address, then fine. But, like, the greater commitment that I've seen mount up from the gaming platform holders, the multiplayer platform holders, to say this is going to stop, and if you guys want to have this discussion, you can go have it somewhere else, which in my opinion is what they should do. I pay for those services. I don't want to be involved in that conversation when I'm gaming, right? That's supposed to be my respite and my escape from that stuff. So, my feeling is at least, the positive to me about the gaming industry and the gaming community and platform holders has been the effort that says, if you can't talk about it over there, you're not going to come and talk about it over here. And so hopefully more of that. Yes, please. If you want me to pay for it, please ask me to, because I will gladly do so. One of the reasons why I spend time on WT Social these days instead of Twitter is because I don't see all the stupidity and the inability to have salient discussions about a thing. But that occupied a lot of time. So, the second half of the year, we're going to start running through this a little faster. So, as we move into July, we got Ubisoft Forward. We got, in all this time while the platform launches were going on, we were like, well, what the heck are the publishers doing? We got news about Ghost Recon Breakpoint. Was that actually a thing?
Yeah, there was an update to it. Yes.
Okay.
Breakpoint came out in 19. There was an update that was released, yes.
Okay. We got Watch Dogs Legion, Assassin's Creed Valhalla, obviously, because we always get Assassin's Creed Valhalla in 2020. Brawlhalla, Might and Magic Heroes, Tom Clancy's Elite Squad, which is a mobile game, if I'm not mistaken. More information on Rainbow Six Siege, Prime's favorite, Hyperscape, Far Cry 6, which actually eventually got delayed into later in 2021, I think, or maybe at this point we thought it was going to come out this year, but it got pushed into 2021 at least. I'll just go ahead and link this other topic. At the same token as Ubisoft was kind of starting its big marketing campaign, we also had maybe the third bad news trend of 2020, which is rampant sexual harassment, which had kind of been a theme around the video game industry, the tech industry in general for a while, but it kind of peaked with, quite frankly, with the scandal at Ubisoft, who, as much as people have talked about Blizzard and Bethesda and Bungie, I would kind of contend, I have always said, Ubisoft is the one big publisher who does it right, but this year that was kind of called into question, on several occasions, and there was a mass exodus of upper-level management, people below the C-level officer level, down to, I think, some of the frontline managers who were all investigated and released, as there was kind of I'll call it a witch hunt for lack of a better term. Witch hunt generally meaning an inappropriate investigation. I don't think this investigation was inappropriate. I think it was to surface a lot of the dirty laundry that had been running around the Ubisoft offices. I'll commingle in here as well the Evo co-founder of one of the is this an esports league or an esports team?
Yeah, so Evo as the fighting game tournament.
Okay.
Yep, and
Right,
they had
right.
that here as well. I think the Ubisoft one, from like a organizational management piece, is that not only were you having directors of big games like Assassin's Creed Valhalla had to step down, but you also had accusations and resignations from people in HR and other kind of structural ways, right? I mean, these are not just people wielding their potential for celebrity within fandom to to create whatever sense that they were doing. But this is also, I mean, this was a structural piece within a corporate culture, and which is not unique to the video game industry. But I think it's always valuable when it can be identified and named and hopefully addressed as well.
Prime, anything to add?
I think it just like DB said, it was good that uh, I shouldn't say good. It was just, I guess I can say good for now, but just seeing these kind of upper level guys, getting what came to them basically is what I want to say. It just wasn't like a lead or like a QA person. It was these higher ups that were actually owning. Well, not I don't even say owning up, but the higher ups targeting. I just yeah, I keep saying all these wrong words. It's hard to talk about this, but just finding out these people that are abusing power and taking care of what should be taken care of, not just unfortunately like I've seen in other jobs that I've been in, just kind of brushed under the rug, so to speak, and just like, hey, don't do that again, kind of a thing. They're actually getting taken out of the company, and fired and stuff like that. So it's good to see, at least from Ubisoft, and didn't really, I don't remember really hearing anything from any other places other than the Evo um, uh, founder, but that this was being done for once, stuff was happening.
Yeah, I'll hit on the. I mean, I think we heard some in 2019 from some other studios as well, but it is. I mean, it was good for Ubisoft that they kind of stuck with this as well. And there's a follow-up story from October where they did an internal staff uh, inventory audit, a survey, which then had, and they released it as well, right? Like from a corporate culture, it'd be very easy to do an internal survey and not release it to the press, or at least try to not release it to the press. But this one, they were very public about because they acknowledged that there was a problem, as you were saying, Prime. That the survey really revealed that this was from The Verge. Uh, in October, which then said that 25%, a quarter of employees have seen or experienced workplace misconduct around sexual harassment or intimidation. And so it is disappointing and saddening that that is a quarter of the people that have experienced that, but it also is valuable that they are naming it, and hopefully it also shows that they are taking it seriously and hopefully working toward resolving or decreasing the culture that allows this as well.
Yeah, my comment on this is, while gamers are all up in arms about crunch, maybe this is the type of thing that you should get up in arms about. Right? Okay, we'll go on to. I think we're into August now. PlayStation State of Play with more stuff.
Sorry, I didn't
announced.
understand.
Yeah, the state of play gave us this was after the June announcement of the console and some big first party, but the state of play gave us a bunch of additional games from Sony. Some big ones, but a lot of kind of smaller stuff, and they even kind of set the table a little bit here to help us not be as enthralled or keep our anticipation as high. So the state of play, then we get we get Crash Bandicoot 4. We get some more gameplay out of that. We get the announcement that the Hitman trilogy is going to be playable out of VR. Spelunky gets a release date. Vader Immortal, which was rumored for PSVR, which has been out on Oculus, gets an announcement as well. We get a date for Control AEW, so this is the Alan Wake, or AWE, the Alan Wake expansion. We get some announcements around Temtem, which is the Pokemon-like PC game, which is out on PlayStation 5 only. And then we get a lot of smaller games. We get some more follow-ups on things, but so this is really more of a cleaning up. We get the Pathless, which the Gaslicleys talked about on this show in the last month or so. So we get some cleanup of some smaller games and not necessarily kind of the big triple A's. So, but it did really help. Again, going back to my point that Sony really continued to help dominate the news cycle is that they had a big one in June. They came back with some more stuff. They came back with some more stuff. They just kept kind of the hype machine rolling in terms of, even if they're not necessarily big titles, but even these smaller titles really help round out their release schedule.
Yeah, no, thanks for stepping in there, DB, in response to my unruly AI assistants in this room. They really, Google and Amazon both need to enable like podcast mode for the Echo and the Google Home. But yeah, so we got more PlayStation stuff. Prime, anything from here? As you mentioned, I guess the story for you, Prime, and how this stuff trickled out is we were kind of all watching to see if any of these announcements were going to tip you in one way or the other. As you mentioned, there were points where you were not super excited by the technology that the Series X and Series S were bringing, and as you mentioned, not really a ton of new games that were must plays. So, did this PlayStation 5 announcement in August kind of land flat with you, or did it tickle the piano keys of excitement?
No, I mean they're kind of like Spider-Man. Kind of always interests me. Vader Immortal was another one that was like, oh man, I kind of wish I had a PlayStation or PSVR because that was another one I would have liked to play. But a couple of actually to expand on DB's run through the games, a couple of games that kind of smaller, but I saw a lot of chatter about just on forums and different Discord servers that I go on is Temtem, which he had mentioned, which is kind of Pokemon like, you catch creatures and battle and stuff, and Genshin Impact, which later on in the year was a big game for not just PlayStation but for mobile. So that maybe we didn't. I mean, at that point, I think Genshin Impact was probably starting to build up steam on mobile, and then I think that this was by the time this came out, it was kind of the tipping point, and it was kind of like one of those everywhere games, at least for a little while.
Yeah, it definitely became an everywhere game. We talked about it on our show. It was, and in part, it was an everywhere game because it was free to play and well designed, even though it was still free to play. As I mentioned in our superlative show the other week, that it was my wretched scum of hive and villainy business practice. But really, if we would have waited a good day or two, probably we all could have leaned on Cyberpunk at that point. But we'll get to that news story eventually. So let's get on with what's the big news story of August.
Well,
And
well, Well, I'm going to wrap back around to that. I'm going to clean up the rest of this stuff in August first. The last thing I'll mention on the PlayStation announcement is this was also, I guess, the point where bug snacks became a thing for people to talk about. But also in the month of August, again, more PS5 bits and pieces here and there. This is the month also that we got kind of the big Nintendo 35 announcement of what they were planning to specifically do. With the year of Mario. I think this is where we first heard about the. You guys help me out because I think you guys have it, but the Mario Kart Live Home Circuit.
Yep, that's exactly what it's called.
Was revealed here as well. There were probably two big news stories. Actually, I'm starting to slide a bit into September as well. So let me go backwards to what DB was trying to get me to talk about was, I mean, I don't want to get into all the details of this because it's a highly convoluted story. I think we did super due diligence in tracking the chronology of this and trying to map that out in the deep dive episode that soon followed it. But obviously, this was the start of the fight between Apple and Epic, which rages on to this day. has had very large ramifications in kind of small muscle movements, but I think some of those small muscle movements reveal some pretty big shifts in trends across the industry. What is funny to date is at its genesis, this all starts because of an epic beef with Valve, and Valve has yet to change any of its financial modeling with regard to the cut that it takes and some of the constraints that it has and what it pays out to developers. In terms of like they hold on to your money until you trip a certain threshold, and then you start getting revenue collected from it, and that's after they've taken their 30% cut. So, Apple kind of winds up becoming a victim in this because they're kind of in the on the spectrum of what Epic is going to war about in general, but isn't really the arch villain of the story necessarily. But this definitely started a big brouhaha as Epic took some very pointed efforts to call Apple out in their regime, and Google as well. Although because of who people love to hate, Google has taken less of a rap in terms of bad PR on this topic than Apple has. Prime, any as a big Fortnite player, any comments on this story?
Well, it didn't affect me directly, just because I don't play on mobile. But yeah, I was just going to mention about Google too being, at this point at least, being part of this. I think eventually they settled it somehow. I'm not even sure what the outcome of the Google part was. But you know, Fortnite was eventually put back on the Google Play Store. Or yeah, I think they're put back on the Google Play Store. At least you can play it again from Google devices, at the very least, tablets or mobile phones. So, yeah, this was just kind of, this was probably another one of those big surprise ones that was kind of up there for me. Didn't make the final cut, but it was just like shocking that all of a sudden, like Epic's like, nah, we're just gonna, not do this anymore. So, and then obviously the fallout with that was, Apple and um, pulling the game from the store, and technically you can still play it, but you're like a season behind. I think even now you could still play it. So it was just one of many surprising and weird stories that happened during the year.
DBQ?
So I'll play the role of fact checker here, and first, back to Valve and Epic. That Valve did decrease their developer costs down from 30 to 25% toward the end of December of 2018. That goes all the way down to 20% if they hit a certain threshold, if they hit over 50 million in sales. So they did, and this was after Epic had months of kind of hitting them in the press about their cut as well. And then on Fortnite, Fortnite is not on the Google Play Store. You can do what you could do before it got up on the Google Play Store, is just sideload it in, so you can play it on a Google device, but it's not on the Play Store. But yes, I think we did a good job of covering this. I think it has the potential to have long-term ramifications depending on how everything settles out. But as we ended up talking about it multiple weeks on the podcast, and then it hit the point of the courts have said they're not going to take it up within another year. So we've got to wait until we find out what really happens here. But it does have the potential to be a lasting impact story.
Yeah, and I think the most significant thing out of this for me was the knock-on effect, right? What came out of this was Epic went to war with Apple. Microsoft somehow got involved and started backing them up. About this time, we started. Microsoft rolled out Project xCloud for Android devices. We were all like, "That's great and awesome! It's happening earlier than we thought. Where the heck is the support for iOS devices?" And out of this brouhaha came the concurrent story that Microsoft had been trying to roll it out on iOS devices, but they were also prevented from doing so. And then we also became aware that there was a generic obstacle in getting Apple support to enable cloud gaming services, period, on iOS devices. We now hear that and I'll just go ahead and skip over to it because it gets into late September, early October. We also got the announcement of Amazon's Luna cloud gaming service, which was going to be on iOS devices. This is the point where we also became aware that the way they were doing that was they were enabling it through the browser, which made it allowable. Microsoft and Google started going down that path as well after they just, I felt, realized that they weren't going to win the fight with Apple, all of which left me very discouraged. I don't want to use cloud gaming. Look, I mean, say what you will, but at the end of the day, right or wrong, and maybe I'm the guy who's wrong, but a progressive web app slash an app in a browser, which is exactly how the iPhone started in 2007 when there was no app store, does not gain all the power and strength of the hardware. It's muted, it's less efficient, it's less effective, and so to me, it's a derp or it's a step down from enabling an app. And so I'm not interested in doing that on an iOS device. So there we are. Any comments on Luna, DBQ, as you're a consumer of that service?
I am, or at least I will am as of today. So, right, I still actually I really enjoy the controller. I like the controller a lot. It's very similar to the uh, Gamepad Plus, right? The Switch controller. Um, uh, it works pretty well. I've had some really good experiences. I've had some laggy experiences that I've talked about here in terms of some Twitch games. Playing it with a good stable Wi-Fi connection is great. Playing it 2 floors above where your Wi-Fi router is not so great. Uh, Even if you've got a network that's got an extra boost later on. But I think the challenge is not so much on my own home network. It is in the way that they have the business model set up for it at this point. Is that right now I'm going to be done with Luna for the next month or more. I canceled the Luna Plus, which is the $6 a month, um, you know, Amazon Prime Video aspect of it. That has a subscription to all you can eat of a handful of maybe a dozen or two games. And I had my 1 month of Ubisoft Plus, and that's it. And in part, I'm done because those are the only two models right now. You're only on a subscription model, right? You cannot purchase anything yourself. You cannot a la carte anything. It is either you are in a subscription service where you are kind of buffeting it, and whether you are doing that with what Amazon provides you or with Ubisoft provides you. But there's not any other option there. Where at least at this point it's in beta. And so I will definitely return to it as they continue to try to modify it. But the fact that this was something that was long rumored for a couple years and it came out and it came out relatively quickly, and stably as well. That one of the things that Stadia had promised or had announced when they launched was that you were going to have the controller was going to connect to Wi-Fi rather than to the individual device or the computer. Uh, and that Stadia launched with right away. So the controller works very well because it's Wi-Fi connected. It's rather than connecting to wherever you. So there are pieces that Luna launched with that Stadia had announced, but it took them longer to get to. Um, but as you said, with cloud-based gaming, there are still some hurdles there that while the technology is functional and pretty good in some capacities, it is not always the best option.
Right, but DBQ, why do you even need Luna when you can play all the Bethesda games that you like on the Microsoft platform? Because about late September, we got news of the acquisition heard around the world. I believe this dropped on a Sunday morning. It dropped at a very weird time. Really, it was incredibly early hours of the day on a Monday morning, but it was not in the prime time of when you were generally looking at Chrome.
I think it was earlier on a Monday because it's
Okay.
suddenly like showing up to work and having, having to maybe take a break from my work to chase the news cycle here a little bit. Yeah.
Right. So about this time, Microsoft agreed to acquire ZeniMax Media for $7.5 billion in cash, more than Disney paid for LucasArts. DBQ kind of already let this out of the bag. So DBQ, any specific comments on this news story?
Congratulations, Microsoft. Right? I mean, I think this is one of the many reasons why I would agree with your Microsoft dominated the news cycle. That this in and of itself gives the ripples outward a significant piece. Um, it, the Game Pass is of great value. It always was a great value, and now to have the ZeniMax Studios in here in Microsoft's portfolio provides an even stronger value add to this service. And so while as we talked about here on this podcast, that the amount that they paid was greater than what Disney paid for Lucasfilm and Marvel. It is also, or at least for Marvel, but it is certainly Microsoft committing to being a player in the long term. And while they were cutting their losses quickly with Mixer, they were definitely pushing all their chips to the center of the table as they dive in for this one as well.
All right, we're into the fourth quarter of the year, so I'm going to go through these even faster because, I mean, we just literally talked about a lot of these a few weeks ago. And so, one of the key themes throughout the year is, as we've already mentioned, we started off the year calling this a soft year. It was a launch year. There wasn't going to be a ton of spending. We pretty much only really were looking forward to The Last of Us Part 2 and Ghost of Tsushima. And out of nowhere, when the pandemic hit, people started spending a ton more money on video games and video game systems than had been precedented. And so video game spending just kind of went through the roof. Video game spending surged during the holiday season, but even, Animal Crossing sold like firecrackers. A lot of the PlayStation games sold. Among Us blew up out of nowhere. There were tons of social gaming, and so as we've seen, generally during a recession, and I don't even DBQ, you're the economics guy. I don't think this year could even be classified as a recession, but the video game industry is in part of and entertainment in general is known to be relatively recession resilient in that in times of economic downturn, that industry, the video games industry, is part of it. Tends to do well because when people feel bad, they don't reduce spending on the things that make them feel good, particularly when they are things that are less expensive than, say, a brand new car or a brand new house. And so that's what people spent money on, as the Prime mentioned, when they were sitting at home. People had their phones in their hand, their iPads in their hand. Mobile game spending went through the roof as well. So knowing that was the trend, I won't get into each individual story, but any comments on that in general, gentlemen?
I think just what we talked about, an hour and a half ago of thinking that this was going to be a slow year for game sales as people were saving up and building up to the console launch, really became just a blockbuster record-setting year, month after month, and to be, close to 50% year over year increase is really significant, and it buoyed all platforms. And I think the other challenge here that we'll get into as we're into November is the unrequited demand of new consoles as well. Is that sales could have been even greater if there was enough in the pipeline to satiate that demand.
Yeah, Prime, anything to add?
Um, no, I mean, I think you guys talked about pretty much, I mean, we even talked about it earlier, how things just kind of flipped head over heel there, at the beginning of the year is oh, we're going to have a crap, not a crap year, but it's just going to be kind of a dull year. And maybe technically kind of was, but since everybody was home, everything, everybody had to buy stuff or entertain themselves, and like I said, sort of, kind of, almost a recession, but not really, but it kind of is. So people, have to do something, so they'll turn to TV and movies, and now video games is like the big thing right now. So obviously they're going to turn to that, and we've seen that with the Switch and the Xbox and PS5 selling like hotcakes. So coming in even into the new year.
And that's a good point to talk about the other big trend and theme that we have kind of already noted and talked around for the year in general, but fourth quarter in particular, was finally in the fourth quarter, all of these things that we had been looking forward to launched. The Xbox launched, the new PlayStation launched, new video cards launched. Interestingly, you have noticed that we have not talked about NVIDIA and AMD's big announcements of the GeForce 3000 series, the RTX 3000 series, or AMD Big Navi RDNA 2, and that's because the release of those GPUs, as far as I'm concerned, haven't made an impact. Gamers still spent money on MSRP priced RTX 2000 series cards this holiday season because they were the only things available. In this quarter, we've also become hyper aware of bots and scalpers and all of the things that people have done to prevent gamers and real fans from being able to access these devices. By the same token, maybe it's okay, because a ton of the things that we were told were going to come along with these consoles didn't actually arrive. So big titles that were concurrently delayed in the rush to get all these consoles out were Crossfire X, Cyberpunk 2077, which did release this quarter but was pushed a couple times, I think, this year, into finally barely hobbling out into release in the month of December. We're also still waiting on Deathloop, which I would contend is a highly anticipated title for this console generation. Dying Light 2, which I'm amazed that game's still in development, got pushed. Far Cry 6 as well. Halo Infinite, with a ton of controversy and wailing and gnashing of teeth around it. Outriders was pushed in the next year. Rainbow Six Quarantine, which I had been looking very forward to, as I dislike the sweatiness of Rainbow Six Siege. And Skull and Bones, which I don't feel that that's necessarily a big deal. I think that game needs more time to ripen in its concept, and it needs to be more than just, hey, we have assets from Assassin's Creed 4, and so we're going to reuse the ship combat engine to roll out this new game, and it sounds like that's what they're doing. I've also predicted that
was there ever actually a date for that, or even a time period for Skull and Bones? I don't think so, was there? So it was kind of weird that they said, hey, we're going to delay it. I was like, we're delaying it from when?
I think it was initially announced as a 2020 game.
Was it?
There was never a solid window. There was just a year.
General.
Yeah, but good note, Prime. We often talk about how people so there's a rumor or there's a leak, and then somebody starts referring to when the company finally announces the actual release date, that somebody says that's a delay, and we're like, no, that's not a delay, because they never officially announced when it was coming out before. But the fact of the matter is that Skull and Bones has been shown again also at 2 E3s, and when we were anticipating that it was going to come out. Obviously it's not, and they're taking that back to the drawing board to kind of retool it, which I think is probably the right thing to do. Great Scott, Ubisoft has enough in its portfolio and publishes about every year that not publishing Skull and Bones isn't going to be a death blow to their business model. Any comments on scarcity of consoles, video game releases, and anything of that nature, which kind of sullied the coloring of the console releases and launches in November?
I think that the delays were probably, once we had hit those first few months of COVID, it was kind of like, okay, there's going to be a lot of delays coming up here near the second half of the year, or the back half of the year. Just as far as like the consoles themselves, I guess I was kind of surprised that it's been so hard to find like the PS5 and Xbox Series, both PS5. I don't even know what they call it. Is it Pro or what? Like the full version, or just called PS5?
Just 2 SKUs, yeah. Disc
Okay.
and discless. Yeah, I don't know.
The disc, and then the Series S and X. I don't know. I guess there's kind of always been scalpers, but maybe just because of the way it is this year, that it showed up more in video games. Just because everybody's looking for them, and of course that's I guess their time to strike, so to speak. Um, so yeah, I mean, I guess those are just kind of the weird things that kind of came out to me.
Yeah, and I would contend, and I'm a person that caused this with my own reaction to the console scarcity. I would contend actually that we've created somewhat of a hyper bomb with respect to the consoles, and part of it is the dynamic of so many of them were only available via digital sales. They're not available for physical in-store pickup. You can't. I mean, I've been thinking. I've spent a lot of time thinking back to the way last generation console launch was, and it was a lot of on my way home from work, I would stop at Walmart or GameStop and see if they had units. You can't do that now. The other thing is we're all sitting at home, and so I mean, even I go into the office a few times a week, but by and large, there's greater time that we're all occupied, I would contend, looking at our phones and checking stock and seeing if we can order one than there have been in previous generations. And so, to a certain extent, we're just hyper aware of the fact that they're scarce. Whereas in years before, a large part of my day was spent, cognitively loaded with just getting to work and back. And when there's days of the week that's not a cognitive load, it offloads me to unfortunately doom scroll about how there's no supply of PlayStations and Xboxes. And I'll just kind of wrap things up here. Cyberpunk in the last part of the year has been a story and a theme. It's been pulled. It's been delisted from the Sony and Microsoft store. It plays fine on PC. It doesn't play so well on consoles. The true next generation versions of the game were delayed, and so those aren't even available until 2021. We're left with kind of uncertainty on what exactly CD Projekt Red is going to do about it. There's a class action lawsuit being filed, etc. In and amidst that news story, as Prime mentioned earlier, in the closing vestiges of this year, we've also seen a continuance of the consolidation of the gaming industry with, as Prime mentioned, EA buying Codemasters, which was an actual outbid of 2K, I think, to obtain that studio. Codemasters, which has just recently swallowed.
Take Two. Either
Take
way.
Two. Yes, yes. I often intermix those. Codemasters, which had just recently swallowed. I always forget their name, but the Project Cars guys had just acquired them. So it's an even further consolidation of the racing talent in the industry. And around the same time, Tencent acquired Warframe developer Digital Extremes, which, in a lot of ways, outside of Call of Duty, kind of gives Tencent a lot of the big shooters. And looter shooters specifically, and games as a service looter shooters, as they now have pieces of Fortnite and Warframe. Digital Extremes previously having a very close relationship with Epic back in the Unreal days. So that and Crow Team actually was picked up. So these are the Serious Sam guys, also picked up by Devolver Digital. So that to me kind of rounds out the year. Any comments on Cyberpunk or any of the industry consolidation that we've seen happen?
I think the Cyberpunk one, I think you ran down it well. We haven't had a chance to really cover it too much here on E2KG because it was developing as we were wrapping up our year. I think it is a story that will linger into 2021. It's a story that, as we look back on the significance in 2020, the fact that a major publisher delists what is a AAA studio's game is significant. What this means in the long term is too soon to tell because this has only been a month or so that this has been out and developing. I think the other piece is how much in December before the tax season ends that we see a lot of these acquisitions kind of wrap up. That this was a big year for acquisitions throughout, and not only the big ones in the fall with Microsoft and Bethesda, but then these ones here, the continuation of Tencent and its acquisitions. That this is the consolidation of mid-tier studios is significant, and I think it also goes back to, like Prime was saying at the beginning, as well as it also it makes it even more meaningful when some of those more indie developers, smaller studios, really get a chance to highlight some of their games as well, and we get a chance to recognize those.
I'll just
Yeah,
mention
I'll just,
before. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Prime.
no, go ahead if you want to go.
And I'll just mention before I turn it over to Prime for his closing remarks. Also, very interesting that Tencent, after being hashed a little bit through the year by the current U.S. administration about all of the various gaming interests that it had its fingers in, kind of went silent and laid low. And then after Biden wins the election, all of a sudden pops up and acquires Digital Extremes. So maybe that was intentional. Who knows? But Prime, what were you going to mention as your closing remarks?
I was just gonna comment on Cyberpunk. You talking about the year kind of turning around, as far as kind of going probably going to be slow, but obviously everything starts to ramp up. But also, CD Project Red riding high on The Witcher 3 from the last couple of years. And then another resurgence. Once we got the Witcher Netflix show, kind of they started seeing that uptick on the Witcher brand again, and then just getting just like power bombed into the ground and just kicked and punched and for good reason. Obviously, they held back on the Xbox One and PS4. I guess there was like an embargo where and other games have done this where there's an embargo on these games up until right before release. Um, I think we talked a little bit about this too. Excuse me, where they kind of got slammed for this when it's happened in the past too. But I guess it's kind of they're the flavor of the month, so to speak. But for good reason. Obviously, stuff wasn't working correctly on the older generation, and ran, like you said, ran better on PC, and I think it runs fairly well on PS5 and the series game or consoles. But still, the kind of shady things that kind of happened that kind of came out afterwards too, from the board and just the higher ups and stuff. People didn't know what was going on with the left hand wasn't didn't know what the right hand was doing. So it's just interesting to see how this is all going to play out within the next probably few months, really, and hopefully they can get everything sorted out, and because it is a good game. I mean, I really do enjoy the game, so hopefully things work out for them.
Very cool. Dance Macchiato, one of our viewers and Discord members in chat, mentions that he just got a Xbox today. Deus Ex, let us know if that's an Xbox Series S or X. So congratulations. He says better late than never, he guesses. So A, thanks for swinging by, and we appreciate it. And B, even more importantly, arguably, congrats on your Series X, he says. So potentially you will have a partner in crime on the podcast next week. So that pretty much puts a wrap on 2020. Thank goodness. Next week is our Pix Play show, our first Gamers Experience show of 2021. There was no formal assignment. It is going to be a discussion of what we spent our time playing over the holiday season, as well as kind of our projections and thoughts and feelings about our approach to gaming in 2021, what we hope to spend our time with, what we hope to see, maybe a little bit about most anticipated titles. Again, you never know when you're going to get that pop quiz, so we will see how that turns out. So tune in next week for that show. We'll be back on our regular time, regular schedule of 8:30-ish p.m. Eastern. Thanks so much for everyone who joined in tonight on the live stream. Thanks so much, Deus Ex Macchiato, for swinging through. We appreciate you. For those of you out there watching the archive version of this episode on the YouTube channel, the E2KG Network, we appreciate you as well. As always, take care of yourselves. Stay safe out there. Play the games that you like. Tune in here to talk about the games that you love. Until next time, good night, good luck, and good gaming. That's going to do it for us. We're out of here.